hung heavy over Silverwood, casting silver shadows through ancient pines that had witnessed centuries of blood and transformation. Maya pressed her back against the rough bark of an oak tree, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she listened to the distant howls echoing through the forest. She shouldn't be here. Omegas like her were forbidden from wandering beyond the village boundaries after dark, especially during the full moon when the alpha wolves ran wild with primal energy that could crush someone like her without a second thought. But Maya had never been good at following rules, especially when those rules were designed to keep her small, powerless, hidden. Her gift wouldn't let her stay hidden tonight. The pull had started an hour ago, a tugging sensation deep in her chest that felt like invisible threads wrapped around her ribs, dragging her toward something in pain, something dying. She had learned long ago not to ignore that feeling. Her grandmother had called it the healer's compass, a rare ability that only manifested in those touched by the ancient bloodlines that were supposed to be extinct. The forest floor was soft beneath her worn boots as she moved deeper into territory she had no business entering. Every snap of a twig made her freeze. Every rustle of leaves sent her heart racing. The stories about what happened to Omegas caught alone in the deep woods were enough to keep most people paralyzed with fear in their homes. Maya had heard them all. Tales of alphas so consumed by their wolf nature during the full moon that they lost all sense of humanity, of pack laws that meant nothing when instinct took over, of bodies found torn apart come morning. She pushed those thoughts away and focused on the pull, following it like a lifeline through the darkness. The scent hit her first, metallic and sharp, cutting through the earthy smell of moss and pine. Blood. Fresh blood. A lot of it. Maya's healer instincts kicked into overdrive, overriding her fear as she rushed toward the source. She found him in a small clearing where moonlight pooled like liquid silver on the ground. He was massive even in his injured state. A wolf the color of midnight with silver markings along his spine that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. His breathing was labored, ragged, each exhale accompanied by a wet rattling sound that made Maya's chest tighten with urgency. 3 deep gashes ran along his side, the work of claws that had clearly been aiming to kill. The wounds were already festering, black veins spreading from the edges in a pattern Maya recognized with growing dread. Cursed silver. Someone had tried to kill him with weapons dipped in cursed silver, a poison so rare and so deadly that it could only mean one thing. This wasn't just any wolf. This was someone important, someone dangerous. Maya should have run. Every logical part of her brain screamed at her to turn around and pretend she had never seen anything. But her hands were already moving, reaching into the leather satchel she always carried, pulling out jars of herbs and vials of tinctures she had spent years perfecting. The wolf's eyes opened as she approached, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. They were the color of molten amber, burning with an intelligence and intensity that was purely human despite the animal form. He growled, a low warning rumble that vibrated through the ground, but he was too weak to move, too far gone to do anything but watch as she knelt beside him. She worked quickly, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she mixed a paste from moonflower petals and blessed sage, ingredients that could counteract cursed silver if applied fast enough. The wolf watched her the entire time, those amber eyes never leaving her face, studying her with a focus that felt almost invasive. Maya tried to ignore the weight of his gaze as she pressed the paste into his wounds, whispering the old words her grandmother had taught her, words in a language that predated the current kingdom, a language of power and blood and ancient promises. The wolf's body tensed beneath her hands, muscles coiling tight as the medicine began to work, burning away the poison. He didn't make a sound, but she could feel his pain through the connection that always formed when she healed someone, a temporary bridge between her life force and theirs. It was draining, pulling energy from her core and channeling it into him. Knitting, torn flesh and purging corruption. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool night air. This was worse than she had thought. The cursed silver had spread deeper than the surface wounds, wrapping around his ribs, seeping toward his heart. If she didn't extract it all, he would die within the hour. Maya closed her eyes and let her gift take over completely, diving deeper into the healing trance than she had ever dared before. She could see the poison now, dark threads of corruption winding through his system like parasitic vines. One by one, she grabbed them with her spiritual hands and pulled, dragging them out of his body and into herself, absorbing the toxicity so it could be neutralized by her unique constitution. Pain exploded through her veins as the cursed silver entered her system. It felt like liquid fire, like her blood was boiling from the inside out. She bit down on her lip hard enough to draw blood, refusing to scream, refusing to stop. The wolf made a sound, something between a whimper and a growl, as if he could feel what she was doing, as if he understood the sacrifice she was making. His massive head lifted slightly, and she felt the gentle pressure of his muzzle against her arm, a gesture so unexpectedly tender that it nearly broke her concentration. Finally, mercifully, the last thread of poison came free. Maya gasped and fell backward, her body shaking violently as her own healing abilities kicked in to purge the toxin from her system. The wolf was already changing, his form rippling and shifting in the moonlight, bones cracking and reforming, until a man lay where the beast had been. He was beautiful in a dangerous way, all sharp angles and predatory grace even while injured. Dark hair fell across a face that could have been carved from stone, high cheekbones and a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. Scars crisscrossed his chest and arms, the marks of someone who had survived countless battles. But it was his eyes that held her captive, those same amber eyes that now burned with human awareness, and something else, something that made her skin flush with heat, despite the chill in the air. He reached for her with a hand that was still trembling from the transformation, his fingers brushing against her cheek with surprising gentleness. When he spoke, his voice was rough, gravelly, like he hadn't used it in days. "Thank you, little healer. You saved my life." Maya wanted to respond, wanted to ask who he was and why someone had tried to kill him with cursed silver, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The healing had taken everything she had, and more. Her vision blurred at the edges, darkness creeping in. She felt strong arms catch her before she hit the ground, felt herself being lifted against a chest that was warm and solid and unexpectedly safe. She should have been afraid. She should have been terrified, but as consciousness slipped away, all she felt was a strange sense of rightness, as if this moment had been written in the stars long before she was born. The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her completely was his voice, low and intense, speaking words that sounded like a vow. "I will find you again, Maya of Silverwood. This debt will be repaid, and I will know your name in my dreams until I do." She wanted to ask how he knew her name when she hadn't told him, wanted to understand the certainty in his tone, but sleep pulled her under before she could form the words. When Maya woke, she was back in her small cottage on the edge of the village, tucked into her own bed with morning sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment she thought it had all been a dream, a vivid hallucination brought on by too many late nights studying her grandmother's old journals. But then she saw them, 3 black feathers tied with silver thread, placed carefully on her nightstand where she couldn't miss them. The calling card of the Nightshade Rebels. The mark of demon. Nightshade himself. Maya sat up so fast her head spun, her heart hammering against her ribs as the full weight of what she had done crashed over her. She hadn't just saved a wolf. She had saved the most wanted criminal in the kingdom, the man who had been waging war against King Cassius Blackthorn for the past 5 years, the rebel leader whose name was spoken in whispers and whose face adorned wanted posters in every town square. The man whose capture would earn a reward large enough to buy a small estate, whose death King Cassius had personally sworn to bring about. And she had healed him, had absorbed cursed silver into her own body to save his life, had felt his gratitude and his promise like a brand against her soul. Maya pressed her hands to her face, trying to process the magnitude of her mistake. If anyone found out what she had done, she would be executed for treason. Omegas had been killed for far less. The king's justice was swift and brutal, and there would be no trial, no chance to explain that she hadn't known who he was, that her healing instincts had taken over before her common sense could intervene. She grabbed the feathers and shoved them into the cold hearth, watching as the flames she summoned with shaking hands consumed the evidence. But even as the feathers burned, she could still feel the ghost of Demon's touch on her cheek, could still hear his voice promising to find her again. Part of her, a reckless part she didn't want to acknowledge, thrilled at the thought. The rest of her was terrified. Maya spent the next 3 days in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every knock on her door, avoiding the village center where royal guards made their daily patrols. She threw herself into her work, treating the minor ailments and injuries that the village Omegas brought to her door. Grateful for the distraction, she was grinding lavender for a sleep tonic when the knock came. Not the tentative tap of a villager seeking help, but a firm, authoritative pounding that made her blood run cold. Open up in the name of King Cassius Blackthorn. Royal business. Maya's hands froze, the pestle clattering against the mortar. This was it. Someone had seen her in the forest. Someone had talked. She was going to die. Her mind raced through impossible escape plans as she walked to the door on legs that felt like water. But running would only confirm her guilt, and there was nowhere to run anyway. The king's reach extended across the entire kingdom and beyond. She opened the door to find not the executioner she had been expecting, but a single guard in the silver and black livery of the royal household. He was young, barely older than her own 23 years, with kind eyes that didn't match the severity of his armor. The guard's gaze swept over her small cottage before returning to her face. "Are you Maya, the healer?" She couldn't speak, could only nod. "You are summoned to the palace. The king requests your presence immediately." The world tilted sideways. The palace. King Cassius wanted to see her personally. This was worse than she had imagined. Executions for treason weren't handled by common guards. They were spectacles, public displays meant to discourage others from making the same mistakes. She would be paraded through the streets, thrown into the dungeons, maybe tortured for information about Demon's whereabouts before being put to death. The guard must have seen the terror on her face because his expression softened slightly. "You're not under arrest," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "The king requires a healer for a private matter. You've been recommended by several villagers as the most skilled in Silverwood. That's all I know." The relief that washed over Maya was so intense she had to grab the doorframe to stay upright. Not an arrest. A summons for her healing skills. She wasn't going to die today. Probably. "Give me a moment to gather my supplies," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. The guard nodded and stepped back to wait. Maya moved through her cottage in a daze, packing her leather satchel with herbs, tinctures, bandages, and tools. Her hands shook as she worked, adrenaline still coursing through her system. A private matter. What could the king possibly need from an Omega healer that his own royal physicians couldn't provide? The palace healers were trained in the most advanced techniques, had access to rare ingredients, and ancient texts that people like Maya could only dream of seeing. Unless this was a trap, after all. Unless the kind-eyed guard was just softening her up before the hammer fell. She forced herself to breathe, to think rationally. If they knew about Demon, they wouldn't have sent a single guard. They would have surrounded her cottage with a full unit, would have broken down her door and dragged her out in chains. This had to be legitimate. It had to be. The ride to the palace took 2 hours. 2 hours of sitting in uncomfortable silence next to the guard as the wagon bumped along dirt roads that gradually transformed into smooth cobblestone. Maya had never been to the capital city of Lunaris before. Omegas rarely traveled beyond their home villages unless they were being transferred to new pack territories. And Maya had no pack, no family except her grandmother's memory. The city was overwhelming, a sprawling maze of stone buildings and crowded streets, the air thick with the scent of too many wolves living in close proximity. She could feel the power radiating from every alpha they passed, that distinctive pressure that made her Omega instincts scream at her to lower her eyes, to make herself small and unthreatening. The palace rose above the city like a mountain of white stone and silver spires, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Guards lined every entrance, their faces hard and watchful. Maya felt like an insect being carried into a spider's web as they passed. Through gate after gate, each one closing behind them with an ominous finality, she was led through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past tapestries depicting ancient battles and portraits of stern-faced kings who all bore a striking resemblance to each other. The Blackthorn line was old, their rule unbroken for 12 generations, their power absolute. Finally, they stopped in front of a set of massive oak doors, carved with images of wolves running beneath a full moon. The guard knocked once, then pushed the doors open and gestured for Maya to enter. She stepped into a room that was clearly a private study, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a huge desk covered in maps and documents. And standing beside that desk, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through tall windows, was King Cassius Blackthorn himself. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had seen his face on coins and in paintings, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of his presence. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from actual combat training, not decorative swordplay. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, pulled back from a face that was all sharp planes and commanding angles. A neat beard framed a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, and his eyes were a startling shade of ice blue, cold and assessing as they swept over her from head to toe. He wore simple clothing for a king, black trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars. But there was no mistaking the power that radiated from him, the absolute authority that made every instinct Maya possessed scream at her to bow, to submit, to bare her throat in acknowledgement of his dominance. She dropped into a curtsy so low her knee touched the floor, her head bowed, her heart racing. "Your Majesty, rise." His voice was deep, commanding, the kind of voice that expected immediate obedience. Maya stood on shaking legs, forcing herself to lift her eyes to his face, even though every fiber of her being wanted to keep them lowered. King Cassius was studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness, his ice-blue eyes moving over her face as if memorizing every detail. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable, until finally he spoke again. "You are Maya, the healer from Silverwood." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "Yes, Your Majesty. I was told you have considerable skill with difficult cases, unusual cases, cases that require discretion." Maya's mouth went dry. This was sounding less like a summons for healing and more like an interrogation. She chose her words carefully. "I do my best to help those who come to me, Your Majesty. I have some knowledge of herbs and old remedies that are not widely practiced anymore." The king's eyes narrowed slightly. "Old remedies. Yes. I've heard you practice the old ways, the techniques from before. The unification. Dangerous knowledge, some might say." The threat in his words was subtle, but unmistakable. Maya's hands clenched around the strap of her satchel. "I only use my knowledge to heal, Your Majesty. Never to harm." A slight smile ghosted across his lips, but it held no warmth. "We shall see. Follow me." He turned and walked toward a door at the back of the study, clearly expecting her to follow without question. Maya hurried after him, her mind racing with possibilities. What could the king possibly need that required old healing methods and complete discretion? They passed through another series of corridors, these ones clearly part of the private royal apartments, until they reached a bedroom that was guarded by 2 massive warriors who stepped aside at the king's approach. The room beyond was dark, heavy curtains drawn against the daylight, candles providing the only illumination. It took Maya's eyes a moment to adjust, and when they did, she saw the figure lying motionless in the enormous bed, a woman, young and beautiful, even in her unconscious state, with long silver hair spread across the pillows like spun moonlight. Her skin was pale, too pale, and even from across the room Maya could sense the wrongness that surrounded her. A dark energy that felt like decay and corruption. "My sister, King Cassius," said quietly, his voice carrying a note of emotion that surprised Maya. "Princess Lyra. She has been like this for 3 weeks. My physicians cannot wake her. They..." Say there is nothing physically wrong with her, that this is something beyond their understanding. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about demon at all. This was about dark magic, about the kind of healing that required knowledge of the spiritual realm, the kind of healing that Maya had hoped she would never have to attempt again after what happened to her grandmother. She approached the bed slowly, setting her satchel down on a nearby table. "May I examine her, Your Majesty?" "King." Cassius nodded, but she could feel his eyes on her, watching her every move with the intensity of a predator. Maya reached out and placed her hand on Princess Lyra's forehead, opening herself to her healing senses. The wrongness hit her immediately, a cold darkness that had wrapped itself around the princess's spirit like chains, pulling her consciousness down into a place where physical medicine could not reach. This was a curse, a powerful one, crafted by someone with significant magical ability and deep malice. Breaking this kind of curse would require Maya to do exactly what she had done for Demon in the forest. She would have to absorb the dark magic into herself, pull it out of the princess, and neutralize it with her own life force. It would be agonizing, dangerous, possibly fatal if the curse was strong enough, and it would reveal the full extent of her abilities to the king, marking her as someone far more valuable and far more dangerous than a simple village healer. But, looking at the young woman lying helpless in the bed, Maya knew she couldn't refuse. She had never been able to turn away from someone in need. Consequences be damned. "I can help her," Maya said quietly, turning to face King Cassius. "But the process will be difficult and painful. For both of us. And it will require complete privacy." The king's jaw tightened. "Explain. This is not a physical ailment, Your Majesty. Your sister has been cursed, bound by dark magic that has imprisoned her spirit. To free her, I will need to enter a deep healing trance and draw the curse out of her body and into mine. My own spiritual defenses should be able to neutralize it. But there are no guarantees. I could die. So could she, if I fail." The king was silent for a long moment, his ice blue eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. "Why would you risk your life for someone you have never met?" The question caught Maya off guard with its directness. "Because I can," she said simply. "Because I have this gift, and she needs it. Because standing by and doing nothing when I could help would make me complicit in her suffering." Something flickered in King Cassius's eyes, an expression too quick for Maya to identify. "Very well. Do what you must. But know this, healer. If my sister dies because of your intervention, your death will not be quick or merciful." "Understood." Maya's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Understood, Your Majesty." The king left the room, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, leaving Maya alone with the sleeping princess and the weight of an impossible task. She spent several minutes preparing, laying out specific herbs around the bed in a protective circle, lighting incense that would help anchor her spirit to her body during the trance, whispering prayers to the old gods that most people had forgotten. Then she climbed onto the bed beside Princess Lyra, positioned her hands over the young woman's heart, and closed her eyes. The descent into the healing trance was like falling through dark water, reality dissolving around her as she sank deeper and deeper into the spiritual realm where curses lived and breathed. She could see the princess's spirit now, a bright silver light trapped inside a cage of writhing black thorns. The curse was shaped like a massive serpent, its coils wrapped tight around Lyra's essence, squeezing slowly, feeding on her life force drop by drop. Maya reached for the serpent with spiritual hands, grabbing its tail and pulling with all her strength. The creature's head whipped around, eyeless and ancient, its mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. It struck at her, sinking those teeth into her spiritual form, and Maya screamed as pain unlike anything she had ever known tore through her. But she didn't let go. She pulled harder, dragging the serpent away from the princess inch by agonizing inch, wrapping it around herself instead, taking the full weight of the curse into her own body, her physical form. Convulsed on the bed, blood streaming from her nose and ears as the dark magic fought against her natural defenses. The serpent was strong, so much stronger than she had anticipated, and for a terrifying moment, Maya thought it might win. might consume her completely and leave both her and the princess dead. Then she felt it. A surge of power that wasn't her own, flowing into her from somewhere beyond the physical realm. Ancient and vast and familiar in a way that made no sense. It felt like her. Grandmother's presence, like the accumulated strength of every healer who had come before her, reaching across death itself to help her in this moment. Maya used that power like a weapon, channeling it through herself and into the curse, burning the darkness away from the inside out. The serpent shrieked, a sound that existed only in the spiritual realm as it began to disintegrate. Piece by piece, coil by coil, Maya destroyed it, enduring the agony as the remnants tried to poison her, trusting in her gift to save her the way it always had. Finally, mercifully, the last piece of the curse crumbled to ash. Maya felt Princess Lyra's spirit surge free, bright and whole and alive, shooting back into her body with enough force to make the physical form gasp and arch off the bed. Maya barely registered the princess waking up. She was too busy dealing with the aftermath of the curse, the residual dark magic that was still trying to eat away at her insides. She fell back against the pillows, her body shaking violently, her skin burning with fever as her healing abilities worked overtime to purge the toxicity. She was vaguely aware of voices, of the doors slamming open, of King Cassius's face appearing above her, his ice-blue eyes wide with something that might have been concern or might have been anger. She couldn't tell, couldn't focus. The darkness was pulling at her again, but this time it felt different, felt final in a way that terrified her. She heard the king shouting for his physicians, felt strong hands lifting her, carrying her somewhere, and then there was nothing but the void, deep and cold and silent. Maya drifted in and out of consciousness for what felt like days, but might have been hours. Every time she surfaced toward awareness, she caught fragments of the world around her, voices arguing in hushed tones, the sensation of cool cloths being pressed to her burning skin, the bitter taste of medicine being forced past her lips, and through it all, a constant presence at her bedside, someone who never left, whose hand occasionally touched her forehead or her wrist, as if checking for signs of life. When she finally woke fully, truly woke, the first thing she saw was King Cassius Blackthorn slumped in a chair beside her bed, his head tilted back against the cushion, his eyes closed in what might have been sleep or might have been exhausted meditation. He looked different like this, the harsh lines of his face softened, the weight of kingship temporarily lifted. He looked younger than his 30 years, and there was something almost vulnerable about the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the way his broad chest rose and fell with each breath. Maya tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it, as pain lanced through her entire body. She must have made a sound because the king's eyes snapped open, that ice-blue gaze locking onto her with laser focus. He was on his feet in an instant, leaning over her with an intensity that stole her breath. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by a pack of alpha wolves," Maya managed to croak out, her throat raw and dry. "How long have I been unconscious?" 4 days. The king's jaw was tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek. "My physician said you should have died. The amount of dark magic you absorbed would have killed anyone else 3 times over. But you burned through it, purged it from your system through sheer force of will and whatever gift you possess. They've never seen anything like it." Maya processed this information slowly, her thoughts still foggy. 4 days. She had been out for 4 days, and the king had apparently been here the entire time. Judging by the dark circles under his eyes and the rumpled state of his usually immaculate clothing. "Your sister," she said suddenly, trying to push herself up despite the protest of her aching muscles. "Is she is alive and well, thanks to you." King Cassius placed a hand on her shoulder, firmly, but not roughly, pushing her back down to the pillows. "Lyra woke within minutes of you losing consciousness. She had no memory of the curse or who cast it, but she is herself again, fully recovered." Relief flooded through Maya, sweet and overwhelming. She had done it. She had saved the princess. She hadn't died. Against all odds, she had survived. The king was still staring at her with that unnerving intensity, his hand still resting on her shoulder, his thumb absently brushing against her collarbone, in a way that made her skin tingle. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "You barely knew the consequences. You could have refused, could have said it was beyond your abilities. Instead, you nearly killed yourself saving someone you had never met, for no reward, no guarantee of payment or recognition. What drives someone to make such a choice?" Maya met his eyes, seeing genuine confusion there, as if the concept of selfless sacrifice was completely foreign to him. Maybe it was, for a king who had been raised to think in terms of political advantages and strategic moves. "I told you before, Your Majesty, because I could, because the alternative was letting her die when I had the power to save her. I don't need a better reason than that." Something shifted in King Cassius's expression, a crack appearing in the cold mask he wore like armor. "You are either the most foolish woman I have ever met, or the most remarkable. I have not yet decided which." Before Maya could respond, the door opened and a whirlwind of silver hair and excited energy burst into the room. The young woman from the bed, Princess Lyra, looked nothing like someone who had been cursed and comatose for 3 weeks. She was radiant, practically glowing with health and vitality, her amber eyes bright with joy as she rushed to Maya's bedside. "You're awake." "Oh, thank the moon. Cassius said you would recover, but I was so worried. You saved my life, and I didn't even get to thank you properly before you collapsed." The princess grabbed Maya's hand in both of hers, squeezing tight. "I am forever in your debt, Maya of Silverwood. Truly. Anything you ever need, anything at all, you need only ask." Maya felt overwhelmed by the genuine warmth and gratitude radiating from the princess. She's so different from her brother, Maya thought, glancing between Lyra's open, expressive face and King Cassius's carefully controlled features. Where the king was all ice and stone, his sister was fire and light. "I'm just glad you're all right." "Your Highness," Maya said softly. "That's all the thanks I need." Lyra shook her head vehemently. "Absolutely not. You will stay here at the palace as my personal guest until you are fully recovered. No arguments. And after that, well, we'll figure something out. I'm not letting the woman who saved my life disappear back to some tiny village where her talents are wasted. I'm sure Cassius agrees." She looked expectantly at her brother, who was watching the interaction with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. "Of course," the king said smoothly, though there was an edge to his voice. "Maya will be provided with quarters in the palace and access to our royal libraries. I'm sure there is much she could teach our court physicians, and much they could teach her in return. A mutually beneficial arrangement." Something about the way he said it made Maya's instincts prickle with warning. This wasn't just generosity. King Cassius didn't do anything without a reason, without calculating how it would benefit him and his kingdom. He had seen what she could do, had witnessed healing abilities that supposedly didn't exist anymore, and now he wanted to keep her close. Whether that was to use her skills or to make sure she didn't become a threat, Maya wasn't sure. But she was too weak to argue, too exhausted to do anything but nod and accept. The next few weeks passed in a blur of recovery and adjustment. Maya's body healed faster than expected, her natural abilities speeding the process, and soon she was well enough to explore the palace and the capital city beyond. Princess Lyra proved to be an enthusiastic guide and an even more enthusiastic friend, dragging Maya to gardens and galleries, introducing her to noble ladies and court officials, dressing her in fine clothes that made Maya feel like she was playing pretend in someone else's life. But it was the nights that unsettled Maya the most, because almost every evening, as the sun set and the moon rose, she would find King Cassius appearing at her door, or in whatever room she happened to be occupying, always with some excuse. He wanted her opinion on a medical text. He needed her to examine one of his guards who had been injured in training. He thought she might enjoy seeing the royal collection of rare healing herbs. The excuses were thin, and they both knew it. But Maya never called him on it, and the king never acknowledged the real reason for his visits. They would talk for hours, conversations that started with medicine and healing, but somehow always wandered into deeper territory: philosophy and ethics, the nature of power and responsibility, the weight of destiny and choice. King Cassius was brilliant, Maya discovered, with a mind that was sharp and incisive and surprisingly well-read. He challenged her assumptions, debated her points with genuine interest rather than condescension, treated her like an intellectual equal in a way that no one ever had before, and Maya found herself looking forward to those evening visits more than she wanted to admit, found herself watching the door as sunset approached, found herself disappointed on the rare nights when the king was too busy with royal duties to come. She told herself it meant nothing. He was the king. She was a nobody omega from a nothing village. Whatever interest he had in her was purely academic, purely professional. But then there were the moments that made her question everything. The way his eyes would linger on her face when he thought she wasn't looking. The way he would unconsciously move closer during their debates, until they were sharing the same sofa, their shoulders nearly touching. The way his voice would soften when he said her name, losing that commanding edge and becoming something almost tender. The way he had touched her shoulder that first day she woke up, his thumb brushing her collarbone in a gesture that was far too intimate for a king and his subject. Maya tried to ignore it all, tried to focus on learning everything she could from the royal libraries and the court physicians, tried to make herself useful enough that her continued presence at the palace would be justified. But denial only worked for so long. The night everything changed started innocently enough. Maya had been reading in one of the palace gardens, a secluded spot surrounded by night-blooming jasmine that the princess had shown her. The moon was nearly full, hanging heavy and golden in the sky, and Maya felt its pull in her blood the way she always did during this phase. Her grandmother had told her that their family had always been moon-touched, their powers waxing and waning with the lunar cycle. She was so absorbed in her book that she didn't hear anyone approach until a shadow fell across the page. She looked up to find King Cassius standing there, still dressed in his formal council robes, looking exhausted and stressed in a way she had never seen him. Without thinking, acting on pure instinct, Maya set her book aside and stood, moving toward him with concern written all over her face. "Your Majesty, what's wrong?" The king's ice-blue eyes focused on her, and there was something dangerous in them, something barely restrained. "Council meetings," he said tersely. Hours of nobles arguing about taxes and territory disputes and trade agreements. Everyone wanting something from me, everyone expecting me to have all the answers. Sometimes I think I will go mad from the weight of it all. Maya's heart ached at the admission. She had never heard him sound so human, so vulnerable. She reached out without thinking and placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of comfort that she would never have dared if she had been thinking clearly. "You don't have to carry it all alone," she said softly. "Even kings need support. Even kings are allowed to be tired." King Cassius stared at her hand on his arm for a long moment, and when he looked up at her again, his expression had shifted into something Maya couldn't quite identify, something intense and hungry and almost desperate. "Do you have any idea what you do to me?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "How you have haunted my thoughts since the moment you walked into my study. How I find myself making excuses to see you, like some foolish boy with his first infatuation." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She should have stepped back, should have removed her hand, should have reminded him of the vast gulf between their positions. But she couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stare at him as he raised his own hand to her face, his fingers brushing against her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so powerful. "I have tried to tell myself it is mere fascination," King Cassius continued, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "That I am simply intrigued by your abilities, by your reckless compassion and stubborn idealism. But I cannot lie to myself anymore, Maya. You have gotten under my skin in a way no one ever has. When I thought you might die after saving Lyra, I felt something I have not felt since I was a child. Fear. Real fear. Not for my kingdom or my throne, but for one person. For you." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that terrified and thrilled Maya in equal measure. She knew she should say something, knew she should establish boundaries. knew she should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak that came from caring for someone so far above her. Station. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was the truth she had been hiding even from herself. "I think about you too," she whispered. "More than I should. More than is wise." The king's eyes blazed with triumph and relief and desire. His hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. And for one breathless moment, Maya thought he was going to kiss her, but then voices echoed from somewhere nearby, guards making their rounds, and the spell broke. "King." Cassius stepped back, his hand dropping away from her, his expression smoothing back into that cold mask of control. "This cannot happen," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You know this, I know this, the complications, the political ramifications, the danger to you. I am the king. You are precious, Maya. Too precious to be caught up in the vicious games of court politics." Maya's heart was hammering so hard, she could barely hear her own thoughts over the rush of blood in her ears. "Then why tell me? Why admit any of this if you are just going to push me away?" "Because I am selfish," King Cassius said bluntly. "Because I wanted you to know that my interest in you is not just professional courtesy or academic curiosity. Because the thought of you believing I see you as merely a useful tool is unbearable to me, but knowing and acting are two different things. I will not ruin your life for my own gratification." Before Maya could respond, before she could tell him that maybe she wanted to be ruined if it meant being with him, the king turned and walked away, his footsteps quick and purposeful, leaving her alone in the garden with her heart in pieces and her mind in chaos. Sleep was impossible that night. Maya lay in her luxurious guest quarters staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of their conversation, analyzing every look and touch, trying to make sense of the king's contradictions. He wanted her, but wouldn't have her. He cared for her, but would push her away. He saw her as precious, but kept her at arm's length. It was maddening, infuriating, and underneath it all, terrifying, because Maya realized with startling clarity that she was falling for him, falling for a king who could never truly be hers, who lived in a world of duty and politics that had no room for something as messy and inconvenient as genuine emotion. She must have finally drifted off sometime before dawn, because she was jolted awake by a loud banging on her door. Maya stumbled out of bed, throwing on a robe as she hurried to answer it, her heart already racing with alarm. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She opened the door to find Princess Lyra standing there, her face pale and stricken, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Lyra." "What happened?" The princess grabbed Maya's hands, squeezing so tight it hurt. "It's Cassius. He is gone. Kidnapped in the night by Demon Nightshade's rebels. They left a note demanding that I surrender the throne and disband the royal army, or they will execute him at the next full moon." Maya felt the world tilt sideways as two impossible truths collided in her mind. King Cassius had been taken by the man she had saved in the forest, the man whose life she had valued over her own safety, the man who had promised to repay his debt to her, and now Demon Nightshade held the king's life in his hands. And it was all Maya's fault. If she hadn't saved him that night, if she had let him die from the cursed silver, King Cassius would be safe. Right now, every consequence that followed, every death that might result from this kidnapping, would trace back to her choice in that moonlit clearing. The guilt hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. "I have to tell someone," Maya thought desperately. "I have to confess what I did and face the consequences." But even as the thought formed, she knew she couldn't. If she revealed that she had saved Demon, she would be executed for treason before she could even attempt to fix this. And more importantly, Princess Lyra would be left alone to deal with this crisis, and Maya's death would serve no purpose except to satisfy the kingdom's need for revenge. No, she couldn't confess. But she could fix this. She could use Demon's promise to repay his debt. She could go to him, demand that he release the king, call in the favor he owed her. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was the only path forward that Maya could see. The only way to make this right. She gripped Princess Lyra's hands tighter, forcing strength into her voice even though she felt like she was breaking inside. I can get him back. Lyra's eyes went wide with shock and confusion. What? How? The rebels won't negotiate with anyone from the palace, and we have no idea where they are even holding him. I have a way to contact them, Maya said, the lie coming easier than it should have. Through my healing networks. Healers talk to each other across territorial lines, share information that others don't have access to. Let me try, please. I owe the king my life. Let me do this. The princess looked torn, desperate hope warring with doubt on her expressive face. Finally, she nodded. Do whatever you must. Just bring my brother home alive. Maya promised she would, even though she had no idea if she could keep that promise. Even though she was about to walk straight into the den of the kingdom's most dangerous rebels, with nothing but her gift and a vow made under moonlight to protect her. She spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and information, using her access to the palace libraries to research everything she could find about Demon Nightshade and his rebellion. The official records painted him as a monster, a traitor who had turned against King Cassius 5 years ago, for reasons that were never fully explained. He had gathered followers from the outcasts and the desperate Omegas and lower-ranked wolves, who felt oppressed by the rigid hierarchy of the kingdom. His attacks on royal outposts and supply lines were strategic and brutal, designed to weaken the crown's power without causing mass casualties among civilians. But there were other sources, older texts and private journals that told a different story. Whispers that Demon had once been close to the royal family, that he had some claim to the throne that was never publicly acknowledged, that his rebellion was not about random chaos, but about something deeper, something personal. Maya found a reference that made her blood run cold. A single line in a book about the history of the Blackthorn dynasty, almost hidden in a footnote. King Aldrich Blackthorn had 2 sons. The elder, Cassius, inherited the throne. The younger, Demon, was exiled for reasons of state security. Brothers. Demon and Cassius were brothers. The kidnapping wasn't just political. It was personal. It was family tearing itself apart. Old wounds and betrayals that Maya couldn't begin to understand. And she was going to walk into the middle of it with her secrets and her guilt, and her desperate hope that Demon would honor his word. As night fell, Maya slipped out of the palace using servants' passages that Princess Lyra had shown her. She made her way through the capital city, keeping to shadows and back alleys, until she reached the forest that bordered Lunaris on the eastern side. This was where the rebels operated, according to the intelligence reports she had read. Somewhere in these trees was Demon's camp, his army of outcasts and revolutionaries. She just had to find them. Or more accurately, she had to let them find her. Maya walked deep into the forest, following game trails and old paths, until she reached a clearing that felt right somehow, a place where the moonlight pooled bright and clear. She stood in the center of that clearing and waited, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She didn't have to wait long. They emerged from the shadows like ghosts, a dozen wolves surrounding her in perfect silence, their eyes glowing in the darkness. Maya's Omega instincts screamed at her to run, but she held her ground, lifting her chin in defiance even as fear made her knees weak. I need to speak with Demon Nightshade, she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. Tell him Maya the healer is here to collect on his debt. The wolves didn't move, didn't react, just continued to stare at her with those unnerving, glowing eyes. Then one of them shifted, bones cracking and reforming, until a man stood where the wolf had been. He was younger than Maya expected, maybe mid-20s, with scars crossing his bare chest and arms. His expression was suspicious and hostile. How do you know about any debt? Demon owes nothing to palace dogs. I'm not from the palace. Maya lied smoothly. I'm the one who saved his life 3 weeks ago when he was dying from cursed silver in the western woods. I pulled the poison from his body at great cost to myself. He promised to repay that debt. I'm here to collect. The man's eyes widened in recognition and shock. You're her, the healer he wouldn't shut up about, the one he's been searching for. A ripple went through the group of wolves, a shift in energy that Maya didn't understand. The man gestured sharply. Come with me. Don't try anything stupid or you'll be dead before you hit the ground. Maya followed him through the forest, surrounded by the pack of wolves who stayed in their animal forms, watching her every move. They walked for nearly an hour, moving deeper into territory that no royal patrol had probably ever reached, until they came to a camp that was far more organized and permanent than Maya had expected. There were structures built into the trees, rope bridges connecting platforms, training areas and supply depots. This wasn't a ragtag group of rebels. This was an army, disciplined and well-equipped. They led her to the largest platform, a structure that served as both headquarters and living quarters. And there, standing, with his back to them as he studied a map spread across a makeshift table, was Demon Nightshade. He looked different than he had in the forest, healthy and whole, dressed in dark leather armor that emphasized his lethal grace. But when he turned at the sound of footsteps, his amber eyes were exactly as she remembered them, burning with that same intensity that had unnerved her the night she saved him. Those eyes went wide when he saw her, shock and disbelief, and something that might have been joy flashing across his sharp-featured face. Maya, he breathed. And the way he said her name felt like a caress. You found me. I have searched everywhere for you, sent out scouts to every village and town, and here you are, walking into my camp as if summoned by fate itself. I came to call in your debt, Maya said bluntly, refusing to be swayed by the warmth in his voice or the way her traitorous heart skipped at his obvious pleasure in seeing her. You promised to repay what you owe me. I'm here, to collect. Demon's smile was slow and dangerous, and absolutely devastating. Anything you want, little healer. My life belongs to you. You saved it, and I am bound by honor to give you whatever you ask. Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. Then I ask that you release King Cassius Blackthorn immediately and unharmed. Call off your demands. Let him go free. The smile vanished from Demon's face as if it had never existed, replaced by an expression of such cold fury that Maya took an involuntary step backward. The wolves around her growled, low and threatening. Demon moved toward her with predatory speed, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. He grabbed her shoulders, not roughly but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away, and leaned down until they were eye to eye. You would waste the debt I owe you on him? On the tyrant who has oppressed our people for years? On the man who sits on a throne built on lies and murder? He must have seen something in her expression, some flicker of emotion she couldn't hide, because his eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. No, it's more than duty, isn't it? You care for him. Somehow, impossibly, you have feelings for that cold-blooded bastard. Maya wanted to deny it, wanted to claim she was acting purely out of moral obligation, but she had never been good at lying. Yes, she whispered, I care for him. I don't fully understand it myself, but I do. Please, Demon, honor your promise. Let him go. Demon's hands tightened on her shoulders, his amber eyes searching her face with an intensity that felt like it could see straight through to her soul. What if I told you that everything you think you know about Cassius is wrong? What if I told you that he is not the honorable king you believe him to be? That his hands are stained with innocent blood? That he stole the throne that should have been mine? Maya shook her head. I don't care about politics or who deserves what throne. I only know that executing him will solve nothing and will start a war that will kill thousands. You can't want that. Demon's laugh was bitter. You think I want war? I have been fighting a war for 5 years, little healer. A war I did not start but will finish, one way or another. Cassius took everything from me. My birthright, my family, my future. He exiled me on our father's orders, cast me out like I was nothing, like the bond of brotherhood meant less than political convenience. And now you ask me to simply let him go? To give up the one advantage I have gained in all these years of struggle? Maya met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down despite the anger and pain radiating from him. I'm asking you to be better than him, to break the cycle of revenge and hatred, to show that you are worthy of leading these people not because you can win through violence, but because you can choose mercy when it matters most. For a long moment, Demon just stared at her, his jaw clenched tight, something like anguish flickering behind his eyes. Then he released her shoulders and stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair in frustration. "You are either incredibly brave or incredibly naive. I cannot decide which." He turned away from her, pacing the length of the platform like a caged wolf. When he finally spoke again, his voice was strained. "I will make you a deal, Maya. Not the deal you asked for, but one you might find acceptable. I will release Cassius, but only if you agree to stay here with me for 1 month. Let me show you the truth about this kingdom and its king. Let me prove to you that the people I lead are not monsters, that our cause is just. After that month, if you still believe I should surrender, if you still think Cassius deserves his throne, I will consider your request again." It was a trap. Maya knew it was a trap. But what choice did she have? If she refused, King Cassius would die. If she agreed, she would be a prisoner of the rebels, away from the palace and Princess Lyra, unable to help or protect anyone. But at least Cassius would be alive. At least there would be a chance, however small, of finding a way to resolve this that didn't end in bloodshed. 1 month, she said firmly. "You release the king unharmed immediately, and I will stay here for 1 month. But I want your word, demon, your binding vow that no harm will come to me during that time, and that at the end of the month, I will be free to leave if I choose." Demon's smile returned, sharp and knowing. "You have my word, little healer. No harm will come to you under my protection, and when the month ends, you will be free to make your own choice about where you belong." He extended his hand toward her, and Maya took it, sealing the bargain with a handshake that felt like signing away her fate. Demon's hand was warm and rough with calluses, and he held on to her for a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was far too intimate. True to his word, Demon arranged for King Cassius to be released that very night. Maya wasn't allowed to see the king before he left, wasn't permitted to send any message or explanation. She could only hope that Princess Lyra would understand, would trust that Maya knew what she was doing, even if it looked like betrayal from the outside. The first week in the rebel camp was an exercise in culture shock and constant observation. Maya had expected to be treated as a prisoner, locked, away or guarded every moment. Instead, Demon gave her almost complete freedom to move throughout the camp, to talk with his followers, to see how they lived and trained and organized themselves. What she found challenged every assumption she had carried with her from the palace. These weren't mindless criminals or power-hungry revolutionaries. They were ordinary people pushed to extraordinary measures. Omegas who had been abused by alpha masters and had nowhere else to turn. Families whose children had been taken for mandatory military service and never returned. Healers and teachers and craftspeople who had been taxed into poverty to fund the royal army and the lavish palace lifestyle. Each person had a story, and each story painted a picture of a kingdom that looked very different from the one Maya had glimpsed during her time in Lunaris. Demon made sure she heard those stories. He orchestrated encounters, casual conversations that somehow always turned to tales of injustice and suffering. He was manipulating her, Maya knew, trying to sway her opinion through carefully curated exposure. But the emotions she saw were real. The pain in a mother's eyes when she talked about her son dying in a border skirmish over disputed territory. The scars on a young Omega's back from beatings administered by an alpha who faced no consequences because of his noble status. The desperation of a farmer whose land had been seized to build a new royal hunting lodge. Maya found herself spending more and more time with Demon himself, drawn in by his charisma and his obvious passion for his cause. He was nothing like King Cassius. Where the king was cold and controlled, Demon was fire and emotion. He laughed easily, got angry quickly, wore his heart on his sleeve in a way that was both refreshing and exhausting. And he was obsessed with her. That much became clear very quickly. He sought out her company constantly, asked her opinion on everything from strategy to philosophy, looked at her with an intensity that made her skin flush and her pulse race. He told her about his childhood in the palace, about growing up in Cassius's shadow. Always second best, always overlooked. He explained how their father, King Aldrich, had been paranoid and cruel in his final years. Convinced that Demon was plotting to usurp Cassius's birthright, even though Demon insisted he had never wanted the throne. The exile had come suddenly, Demon explained one night as they sat by the fire. I was 17. Cassius was 20, and newly crowned after our father's death. He called me into his study and told me I had to leave, that for the good of the kingdom, there could only be one Blackthorn in power. He gave me a choice: exile or execution. Some choice. I asked him if our brotherhood meant nothing, if all the years we had spent together counted for less than political stability. He looked at me with those ice-blue eyes and said that he was sorry, but he could not risk a potential rival to his throne, as if I had ever been a rival, as if I had ever wanted anything but to serve alongside him. The bitterness in Demon's voice was palpable, and Maya felt her heart ache for the pain of that betrayal. She tried to imagine King Cassius making such a cold calculation, tried to reconcile the man who had touched her face with such gentleness with the brother who had cast out his own blood. But people were complicated. Maya was learning. They could be both kind and cruel. Both. Loving and ruthless. Maybe both versions of Cassius were true. Maybe that was what made everything so impossible. 2 weeks into her stay, Demon took her to see something he said would change her perspective entirely. They rode for hours into the deep mountains, to a valley that was hidden from the main roads, a place where the rebels had built a small village for refugees who had fled royal persecution. What Maya found there broke something inside her. There were children here, dozens of them, living in crude shelters with barely enough food. Families huddled around cooking fires, their faces gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. And worst of all, there was a mass grave at the edge of the settlement, marked with simple wooden crosses and crude headstones. These people died because of Cassius's policies, Demon said quietly, standing beside her as she stared at the grave in horror. When he raised taxes to fund his new palace wing, when he increased tithes to support his military expansion, these are the people who couldn't afford to pay. These are the people who lost their homes, their livelihoods, their lives. And Cassius sits in his palace and tells himself he is a just and fair king, while his people starve in the shadows. Maya felt sick, her stomach churning with the weight of what she was seeing. She wanted to deny it, wanted to insist this was rebel propaganda, but the evidence was right in front of her. Real people suffering real consequences from decisions made in distant throne rooms. How does he not know? She whispered. How can he make these choices and not see the result? Because he doesn't want to see, Demon said. And there was genuine sadness in his voice now, not just anger. Because it's easier to focus on grand strategy and political alliances than to look at the human cost of your rule. I don't think Cassius is evil, Maya. I think he is willfully blind, and that might be worse. They stayed in the refugee village for 3 days, and Maya threw herself into healing work with desperate intensity. She treated infections and malnutrition, set broken bones and eased chronic pain, used every skill she possessed to help these people who had nothing. And through it all, Demon worked beside her, not as a rebel leader or a prince in exile, but as a man who genuinely cared about the well-being of the people who had followed him. Maya saw a different side of him here, saw the compassion beneath the rage, saw why people were willing to risk everything to follow him. On the journey back to the main camp, Demon rode close beside her, their horses nearly touching. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that only came from shared experience and growing trust. Finally, Demon spoke, his voice quiet and thoughtful. I know you have feelings for my brother Maya. I can see it in your eyes when his name is mentioned, in the way you defended him, even when it cost you your freedom. And I will not pretend it doesn't cut me to see you care for the man who destroyed my life. But I need you to understand something. The feelings I have for you are not a manipulation tactic. They are not part of some strategy to turn you against Cassius. From the moment I opened my eyes and saw you in that forest, risking everything to save a stranger, I knew you were extraordinary, and every day since then has only confirmed it. Maya's hands tightened on her reins, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. Demon, He held up a hand, cutting her off gently. I am not asking you to return my feelings. I am not asking you to choose me over him. I just need you to know that they exist, that they are real, because when this month ends and you make your decision about where you stand, I want you to make it with full knowledge of what I am offering. Not just a cause or a rebellion, but a life with someone who sees you, truly sees you, and values you for exactly who you are. Before Maya could respond, shouts erupted from the camp ahead of them. They urged their horses forward and arrived to find chaos. Royal soldiers had found the camp, a full battalion in silver and black armor, and they were attacking with brutal efficiency. Fire arrows rained down on the tree structures, smoke billowing into the sky. Rebels fought back desperately, but they were outnumbered and caught by surprise. Demon was off his horse in an instant, shifting into his massive wolf form and throwing himself into the battle with savage grace. Maya wanted to run, wanted to hide. But people were injured, people were dying, and her healer instincts wouldn't let her abandon them. She grabbed her satchel and rushed toward the wounded, dodging between fighting wolves and soldiers, her hands already reaching for supplies. She found a young woman pinned under a fallen beam, her leg crushed and bleeding. Maya worked frantically to free her, to stop the bleeding, barely aware of the battle raging around her. She was so focused on her patient that she didn't see the soldier approaching from behind, didn't see the sword raised to strike her down. But Demon saw. He launched himself across the platform with inhuman speed, his wolf form slamming into the soldier and sending them both tumbling over the edge. Maya screamed, rushing to the edge to look down, her heart in her throat. Demon had shifted back to human form, standing over the unconscious soldier, his chest heaving with exertion. He looked up at her, and even from this distance she could see the fierce protectiveness in his amber eyes. The battle ended as quickly as it had started, the royal soldiers retreating when they realized they were facing more resistance than expected. But the damage was done. The camp was in ruins. Multiple structures burned beyond repair, and there were casualties on both sides. Maya worked through the night treating the injured, moving between rebel and royal soldier alike, her gift making no distinction between ally and enemy. She found Demon, watching her as she treated a young royal guard who couldn't have been more than 18, her hands gentle as she set his broken arm despite knowing he had come here to kill them all. "You treat our enemies with the same care as our people," Demon said quietly. "I have never seen anything like it." "Pain is pain," Maya replied without looking up from her work. "Suffering doesn't care about politics or loyalties. This boy is someone's son, someone's brother. He deserves healing just as much as anyone else." Demon crouched beside her, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. "You are going to force me to see my enemies as human, aren't you? Going to make it impossible for me to hate with the same pure conviction I have carried for 5 years." Maya finally looked at him, meeting those amber eyes that had become so familiar over the past weeks. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," she said softly. "Maybe letting go of hate is the first step toward actually fixing what's broken." Something shifted in Demon's expression, a crack appearing in the armor of righteous anger he wore like a second skin. He leaned forward, his forehead coming to rest against hers, his eyes closing as he took a shuddering breath. "You undo me, little healer. You make me question everything I thought I knew about justice and revenge. I don't know whether to thank you or curse you for it." The moment hung between them, intimate and fragile, and Maya felt the pull toward him, the temptation to close the small distance and kiss him, to give in to the connection that had been growing between them since that night in the forest. But before she could decide, before she could act on the impulse, a commotion erupted at the camp's perimeter. More soldiers were approaching, but these weren't attacking. They were carrying white flags of truce, and at their head rode a figure Maya would have recognized anywhere. King Cassius Blackthorn had come for her personally. The king dismounted with fluid grace, his ice blue, eyes scanning the destroyed camp until they landed on Maya. Even from across the distance, she could see the relief that flashed across his face, quickly replaced by cold fury as he took in the scene. Maya kneeling beside Demon, their foreheads touching, his hand on her shoulder. The king's jaw clenched so tight, Maya could see the muscle jump. Demon stood slowly, deliberately, positioning himself between Maya and the approaching king. The two brothers faced each other for the first time in 5 years, and the air between them crackled with tension and old wounds. "Brother," Cassius said, his voice cold and formal, "I have come under flag of truce to retrieve what was stolen from me. The healer Maya is under my protection. Release her now, and I will overlook this latest act of rebellion." Demon's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Your protection? Is that what you call it? The same protection you offered me when you exiled me? The same protection you give your people while they starve?" "Maya is here of her own free will, Cassius. She traded her freedom for yours. Perhaps you should ask yourself why she felt that was necessary." The king's eyes flickered to Maya, something like hurt crossing his features, before he locked it down. "Is this true? Did you come here willingly?" Maya stood on shaking legs, acutely aware that every eye in the camp was on her, that her next words could spark a war or prevent one. "I came to save your life, Your Majesty. Demon was going to execute you. I called in the debt he owed me, and negotiated your release in exchange for staying here and listening to his side of the story. I made a vow to remain for 1 month. That time is not yet complete." King Cassius looked like she had struck him. "You sacrificed yourself for me. Why?" "Because I care about you," Maya said simply, deciding that this moment called for nothing but the truth. "Because the thought of you dying was unbearable. Because I am foolish enough to believe that somehow, impossibly, there might be a way to resolve this conflict that doesn't end with one of you dead." The king's expression cracked, raw emotion bleeding through the cold facade. "Come with me now, Maya. Please. I cannot leave you here, in danger, surrounded by enemies. You don't know what he is capable of, what he might do." "She knows exactly what I am capable of," Demon interjected, his voice hard. "She has seen my people, heard their stories, witnessed the consequences of your rule. Unlike you, brother, I have not hidden the truth from her. I have not tried to keep her locked away in a palace where she cannot see the suffering you cause." King Cassius's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You speak of suffering while you burn villages and attack supply lines. You speak of truth while you manipulate a kind-hearted healer into sympathizing with your cause. Do not pretend your hands are clean, Demon. We have both made choices we regret. The difference is I do not hide behind noble rhetoric while making them." Maya stepped between them, physically placing herself in the middle of the conflict, her hands raised as if she could somehow hold back the tide of their mutual hatred. "Stop. Both of you. Just stop. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. You are brothers. You are family. And you are tearing each other apart over old wounds and pride. Don't you see? The real enemy is not each other. It's the system that forced you into these positions. The expectations and traditions that made you believe there was only room for one Blackthorn in power." Both men stared at her like she had grown a second head. Then Demon spoke, his voice gentle in a way that seemed incongruous with the tension of the moment. "You think we can simply forgive and forget 5 years of war? You think we can embrace as brothers and fix a kingdom broken by generations of inequality and injustice? I think you can start," Maya said firmly. "I think you can choose something different than what your father chose, than what all the kings before him chose. Demon, you have shown me suffering that should never exist in any kingdom. Cassius, you have resources and power to change systems if you had the will to do it. Together, you could accomplish what neither of you can alone, but only if you stop seeing each other as enemies and start seeing each other as what you actually are, family." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with possibility and doubt in equal measure. King Cassius's ice-blue eyes met Demon's amber gaze across the space of Maya's shoulders, and something passed between them. Some communication that needed no words. Finally, the king spoke, his voice rough with emotion he was no longer bothering to hide. "I have regretted exiling you every day for 5 years, Demon. It was Father's final command, his dying wish that I protect the throne from any potential challengers. He was paranoid and cruel at the end, seeing threats everywhere, trusting no one. I was young and afraid. And I convinced myself I was doing the right thing for the kingdom. I told myself you would be better off away from court politics, that I was protecting you as much as my crown. But the truth is, I was a coward. I chose power over brotherhood, and I have hated myself for it ever since. Demon's expression shifted. Surprise and pain, and something that might have been the beginning of hope flickering across his sharp features. You never told me it was Father's order. I thought you wanted me gone, that you saw me as a threat to your ambitions. All these years I believed you betrayed me for your own gain. I should have explained, King Cassius said quietly. I should have fought Father's command, should have found another way. But I was 20 years old and terrified of making a mistake that would doom the kingdom. So I made a different mistake, one that has haunted me far more than any political failure could have. Maya felt tears pricking her eyes as she watched the two brothers. Watched. 5 years of pain and misunderstanding begin to crack under the weight of honest confession. She stepped back, giving them space, and Demon moved forward until he and Cassius stood face to face, close enough to touch. I have done terrible things in the name of revenge, Demon said, his voice barely above a whisper. Burned supply depots, killed your soldiers, struck at everything you built out of spite and rage. I told myself it was for the people, for justice, but the truth is I wanted you to hurt the way I was hurting. I wanted you to feel the loss and betrayal I felt, and it has eaten away at me, corroded everything good in me until I barely recognized myself anymore, until she showed me another way. He glanced back at Maya, gratitude, and something deeper shining in his eyes. She saved my life, and then she saved my soul. Showed me that mercy could be stronger than vengeance, that compassion could change the world in ways violence never could. King Cassius's gaze followed Demon's to Maya, and the look on his face was so intense, so full of longing and pain and love barely restrained, that it took Maya's breath away. She has that effect on people, the king said softly. She makes you want to be better than you are, to live up to the faith she has in you, even when you don't deserve it. She is remarkable. She is standing right here and can hear you both talking about her, Maya pointed out, trying to inject some levity into the moment, even as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Both brothers laughed, the sound startled and genuine, and Maya saw them relax marginally, saw the ghosts of the boys they had been before crowns and exiles and wars had torn them apart. The truce negotiations that followed took place over 3 days, with Maya acting as mediator between Cassius's royal delegation and Demon's rebel council. It was exhausting work, navigating generations of grievances and competing visions for the kingdom's future. But slowly, impossibly, they began to make progress. King Cassius agreed to comprehensive reforms, including reduction of taxes on lower classes, establishment of an independent council to hear grievances against nobles, and the creation of schools and healers' centers in underserved regions. Demon agreed to cease all military actions and bring his followers back into the kingdom's fold, with pardons granted for past actions taken in the name of the rebellion. The details were complex and would take months to fully implement. But the framework was there, a path forward that didn't require either brother's death. On the final night before the agreement was to be signed, Maya found herself unable to sleep. She walked through the camp, now bustling with hopeful energy, as rebels and royal soldiers worked side by side to rebuild what had been destroyed, and ended up at the edge of the forest, where moonlight pooled silver and beautiful. She wasn't surprised when she heard footsteps behind her, or when she turned, to find both Cassius and Demon approaching from different directions, as if they had both been seeking her out and arrived at the same moment by coincidence or fate. The three of them stood in awkward silence for a moment before Demon spoke, his characteristic bluntness cutting through the tension. "We cannot keep avoiding this conversation. We have negotiated peace for the kingdom, but we have not addressed the personal situation that stands between us. We both care for Maya. We both want her. And she cannot choose both of us." Maya's heart clenched painfully. She had known this moment was coming, had dreaded it with every fiber of her being, because the truth was, she did care for both of them, in different ways, but with equal intensity. Cassius, with his brilliant mind and hidden vulnerability, the way he made her feel seen and valued as an intellectual equal. Demon, with his passionate heart and fierce loyalty, the way he inspired her to believe change was possible. How could she choose between them without destroying part of herself in the process? Before she could speak, King Cassius stepped forward, his ice-blue eyes locked on her face. "I need to tell you something, Maya. Something I should have told you weeks ago but was too afraid to admit. When you collapsed after saving Lyra, when I thought you might die, I felt a bond snap into place between us. The mate bond. You are my true mate, the one person in all the world who is meant to be mine. I have spent years believing such bonds were myth, romantic nonsense with no basis in reality, but I felt it, undeniable and absolute, and it terrified me, because I am a king, and you are an Omega healer with no political connections, no way to benefit my kingdom. Taking you as my mate would be seen as weakness, as choosing personal desire over royal duty, so I tried to ignore it, tried to keep you at arm's length, even as every instinct I possessed screamed at me to claim you, to mark you, to make you mine in every way possible. Maya felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The mate bond, the rarest and most sacred connection between wolves, a tie that transcended logic and choice, that bound two souls together across lifetimes. She had read about it in her grandmother's journals, but never thought she would experience it herself. And now Cassius was telling her she was his mate, that everything she had felt between them was rooted in something ancient and inevitable. But before she could process that revelation, Demon laughed, the sound sharp and almost manic. Of course you would claim a mate bond with her. How convenient that the one woman we both want happens to be destined for the king. How perfectly in character for you to have even this, Cassius." He turned to Maya, his amber eyes blazing with desperation and defiance. "I cannot offer you a mate bond, little healer. I can only offer you my heart, freely given, with no destiny or fate forcing your hand. I can offer you a choice, real choice, to be with someone because you want to, not because ancient magic tells you that you should. Is that not worth something? Is choosing love not more powerful than accepting fate?" Maya felt like she was being torn in two, her heart pulling in opposite directions with equal force. She looked between the two brothers, saw the hope and fear and love on both their faces, and knew that whatever she said next would change everything. But then, as she opened her mouth to speak, pain exploded through her chest, sharp and sudden and overwhelming. She gasped, stumbling backward, her hand clutching at her heart as power surged through her body like lightning. The world around her began to shimmer and shift, reality peeling back to reveal something underneath, something vast and ancient and terrifying. Both men rushed toward her, but Maya held up a hand, stopping them with a gesture that carried more authority than she had ever possessed. Her eyes were glowing. She could feel it. Bright silver light pouring from them as knowledge flooded her mind. Memories that were not her own, spanning centuries, lifetimes of healers stretching back to the very beginning of the wolf kingdoms. The prophecy. The words came from Maya's mouth, but in a voice that was layered, harmonized, as if 1,000 women were speaking through her at once. The last daughter of the moon will stand between brothers divided, will carry the power to unite or destroy, will choose not one path, but all paths, will die and be reborn, will break the chains of destiny and forge new bonds from the ashes of the old. Her body began to change, power reshaping her on a fundamental level. The Omega markers that had defined her entire life burned away, replaced by something new, something that had not existed in generations. Alpha energy, but different, feminine and fierce, touched by moon magic and ancient purpose. Maya was transforming, ascending to a form that legends spoke of, but that no one alive had ever witnessed. The first female alpha in 500 years. The true queen of wolves. The transformation was agony and ecstasy combined, her bones breaking and reforming, her very essence being rewritten. She was dimly aware of Cassius and Demon shouting, of power radiating out from her in waves that sent both men to their knees. And then, at the peak of the transformation, Maya's heart stopped. Her body went limp, collapsing to the ground as the light within her extinguished like a snuffed candle. She was dying, she realized distantly, her consciousness floating above her body, watching as Cassius and Demon both lunged forward, their faces masks of horror and grief. The prophecy had said she would die and be reborn, but there was no guarantee the rebirth would happen. No certainty that this was not simply the end. But as Maya's spirit began to drift away from the physical realm, she felt hands grabbing her, pulling her back. Not physical hands, but spiritual ones, belonging to all the healers who had come before her, all the women of her bloodline reaching across death to anchor her to life. Her grandmother's voice rang clear and strong in the void. "It is not your time, little one. You have work to do, a kingdom to heal, a destiny to fulfill. Come back. Choose life. Choose love. Choose your own path, and let no one, not even fate itself, tell you what you must be." Maya gasped, her eyes flying open, her heart slamming back to life with a force that made her entire body convulse. But she was different now, fundamentally changed, and as she sat up, she felt the full weight of her new power settling into her bones. She was no longer Omega or Alpha in the traditional sense. She was something beyond, something that transcended the old hierarchies. She was the bridge between all wolves, the one who could unite the divided kingdom not through dominance, but through understanding, not through force, but through compassion. Cassius and Demon were both staring at her with expressions of awe and fear and desperate relief. Maya looked between them, at these two men she loved in such different ways, and finally understood what the prophecy had meant. She did not have to choose between them. "I reject the premise of your question," Maya said, her new voice carrying power and authority that made both brothers straighten unconsciously. "You ask me to choose as if love is a finite resource, as if my heart has room for only one, but I am not bound by your rules anymore. I am not limited by tradition or expectation or the way things have always been done. The mate bond is real, Cassius. I feel it between us, silver and strong and undeniable. But Demon is right that chosen love has its own power, its own validity. So I choose both. I choose to honor the bond with Cassius, while also honoring the love I have built with Demon through choice and shared experience. I choose to remake the rules, to create something new that this kingdom has never seen." The shock on both their faces would have been comical if the moment weren't so pivotal. But before either could protest, Maya raised her hand and power flowed from her, visible as silver light, wrapping around both men and pulling them toward her. When the light faded, she could feel new bonds in place, connecting all three of them in a configuration that defied every tradition the wolf kingdoms had ever known. A true triad bond, equal and balanced, with Maya at the center not as a prize to be won, but as the axis around which everything would turn. "This is impossible," Cassius breathed, but his eyes were wide with wonder rather than rejection. "The old laws, the traditions, they don't allow for this." "Then we will change the laws," Maya said simply. "We will show this kingdom that there are more ways to build a family, to structure power, to love and be loved, than the narrow paths we have been walking for generations. If we three can set aside our egos and our expectations to build something new together, then so can this kingdom." Demon laughed, the sound incredulous but genuine. "You are going to turn the entire world upside down, aren't you, little healer? Going to make us all question everything we thought we knew about how things should be." "That is exactly what I am going to do," Maya confirmed, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. The coronation happened 3 months later, after the initial chaos had settled and the reforms had begun to take root. It was unlike any ceremony the kingdom had ever witnessed. King Cassius Blackthorn stood at the center, his ice-blue eyes steady and sure, as he addressed the assembled nobles and common people alike. "Today, we usher in a new era for our kingdom, an era of 3 rulers instead of 1, of shared power and shared responsibility. I claim Maya of Silverwood as my mate and co-ruler, recognizing her as the true Alpha Queen prophesied to unite our people. And I claim my brother Demon Blackthorn as my partner in leadership, ending the exile that should never have been imposed, acknowledging the wrong that was done, and working to build something better from the ashes of our mistakes. The crowd murmured, shocked and uncertain, but Maya could feel the current of hope running beneath the doubt. People wanted to believe change was possible. They wanted to believe their leaders could be better, could choose compassion over cruelty, unity over division. Maya stepped forward, dressed in robes of silver and white that marked her as both healer and alpha, her power radiating from her in waves that made even the most hardened warriors bow their heads in respect. She placed one hand in Cassius's and one in Demon's, and felt the triad bond pulse with energy and rightness. "I accept this responsibility," she said, her voice carrying across the vast throne room, "not because I seek power or glory, but because I believe in the possibility of a kingdom where strength is measured not by dominance, but by service, where leaders are judged not by their bloodline, but by their compassion, where every wolf, regardless of rank or status, has value and voice. This is the kingdom we will build together. This is the promise we make to you." The cheers that erupted were not universal, but they were loud and genuine, and Maya knew that was enough. Change would not happen overnight. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments of doubt and struggle, but they had taken the first step, had shown that a different path was possible. The months that followed were challenging in ways Maya had never anticipated. Learning to rule alongside Cassius and Demon, to balance 3 strong personalities and competing visions, required constant communication and compromise. There were arguments, moments of friction when old wounds resurfaced or new disagreements emerged, but there was also love, fierce and transformative, binding them together even through the difficulties. Cassius taught Maya about strategy and statecraft, showed her how to navigate the complex web of noble politics and international relations. Demon taught her about connection with common people, about listening to those without power, and centering their needs in every decision. And Maya taught both of them about healing, about how to mend what was broken not just in bodies, but in systems and hearts. The reforms they implemented were radical by any standard. Establishment of a people's council with real authority to check royal power, redistribution of land from nobles who had accumulated vast estates to farmers who would actually work it, free education and healthcare for all citizens regardless of rank, recognition of different family structures and relationship bonds beyond the traditional. Each change faced opposition from conservatives who clung to the old ways, but Maya and her partners were relentless, pushing forward even when progress felt impossibly slow. And through it all, the triad bond deepened, became something that defined all 3 of them in ways they had never expected. Maya found herself falling more deeply in love with both men as time passed, appreciating their different strengths and quirks. The way Cassius would work late into the night perfecting legislation while Demon would drag her away to visit villages and hear directly from citizens. The way both of them would look at her with such devotion and respect that it still took her breath away. On the anniversary of her transformation, as Maya stood on a balcony overlooking the city of Lunaris, she felt arms wrap around her from both sides. Cassius on her left, Demon on her right, the 3 of them fitting together like pieces of a puzzle that had finally found its proper configuration. "Regrets?" Cassius murmured against her ear, his breath warm on her skin. "Never," Maya said firmly, leaning back into their combined embrace. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be, doing exactly what I am meant to do, with exactly the people I am meant to love." Demon pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice soft and content. The girl who saved an enemy in the forest and changed the fate of a kingdom. The healer who became a queen and taught 2 brothers how to be whole again. "I would follow you anywhere, little healer, to the end of the world and back, and I would follow both of you," Cassius added, his usual reserve melting into genuine warmth. "My mate, my brother, my partners in all things. Together we are stronger than any of us could ever be alone. The moon rose full and bright over Silverwood, bathing the three of them in silver light, and Maya felt the rightness of this moment settle deep into her soul. She had saved an enemy and fallen in love with a king. She had challenged destiny and forged her own path. She had died and been reborn into her true purpose. And now, with her mates by her side and a kingdom to heal, Maya was finally, completely, home. If you enjoyed this story of forbidden love, supernatural destiny, and the power of choosing your own path, please like this video and leave a comment below about which moment resonated with you most. Was it the forest healing scene, the triad bond revelation, or something else entirely? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more romance stories that challenge conventions and celebrate love in all its forms. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, may you always have the courage to follow your heart, even when it leads you to impossible choices and extraordinary transformations.